a Sapphire Running Zone podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Tim from the Sapphire Running Zone, and welcome to another of our Don't Forget Your Gels podcast series. Today we're off to the east coast of the US, and we've got a session with Wilson, who has an incredible story to tell us. He's a man who's done so many extreme challenges and massive amount of fundraising. Really looking forward to this. So welcome, Wilson. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Well, I'm saying hi from Miami. I came down here to actually train in the heat and run a couple 20-milers and then fly back to New York to parent my kids. I started running, moving to America at 16. I went to boarding school and immediately thrown into the basketball foray and sports and, kind of culture as a part of the everyday life. And so track and field, basketball, soccer, all fairly active running kind of activities and sports. It ended up playing a significant role in my life because I had chronic anxiety as well as medical depression. I had started getting depressed since the age of about 7, 8 years old. I'd been taken away from my mother at the age of 5 or 6 through a fairly traumatic divorce. My parents lived in different countries. I had a lot of separation anxiety. I've lived in some 48 plus homes since I've been born. And so I had extensive chronic depression and I was suicidal. When I started doing sports at 16, it was my first kind of experience around, I would say, the difficulty as well as the joyfulness of activity and exercising and exhaustion and all the biological and chemical experiences that comes from that. And originally wasn't really necessarily long distance running as much as sports itself, including team, including community, including support, things that I didn't have growing up. And it wasn't until post-college that I started running 10Ks. And I entered my first race post an evening of trying to ask a girl out on a date. And she happened to be part of the New York Nike Team Running Club, which I had no knowledge of at that time. And she was like, well, there's a 10K in Central Park. Why don't you come tomorrow? I have to go home. And I was like, yeah, I will do that. Partied until 3 or 4 in the morning, got up 3 hours later, and showed up and got my bib and ran my first 10K Manhattan, Central Park loop, which was absolutely brutal. But I remember also having a really amazing experience because of the community and the cheering and the amount of people and somewhat of the competitive aspect of finishing the race and seeing yourself through that. That was actually the real beginning to me realizing that running, and hyper physical activity was really, really positive to my chemical wiring, my state of mind every day, my sense of peace. And so I had many doctors, and in my early 20s, one of them suggested that the reality I understood as a depressive person wasn't my reality, and I could live a different life without the same amount of suffering, emotional and physical. Recommended taking pharmaceutical. I didn't want to do that for a wide variety of reasons. So I created these personas essentially where I did club promoting, and I was very active in social life in New York, and I was working on Wall Street, and I was doing bodybuilding, and I was running, and I slept 4 hours a day, and I did that for many, many years. And that hyperactivity and hyper engagement did have a really significant positive impact. So that's been an amazing journey, but it's completely foundational to how I ended up becoming an entrepreneur and having that resilience and that discipline and that desire to learn with humility while also fear, while also knowing that things are possible, that becoming the Superman is possible. And quite frankly, in my childhood, because of the difficulties of my childhood, there was only one person at the opposite of that. That was the character of Superman. And as a kid, I used to draw and be a cartoonist and loved anime and loved superhero characters. And it's fairly common to people who are very depressive to look for other imaginary worlds. And I was a very imaginary kind of person. I lived in my own head all the time and in other worlds. And Superman was, to me, the only persona, the only kind of character that was at the opposite of my entire experience of my childhood. And so if I didn't want to experience life that way anymore, well, then the Man of Steel, as he is known to be, was really the only character I had to become. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic of journey of becoming your own Superman and realizing that being Superman is not being of steel, but being of vulnerability and humility. I learned to pivot the Man of Steel into, embracing that all the vulnerability and humility, actually having the courage to live with those and also do impossible things with them, despite or in regards of them.
How long ago did you really sort of enact that man of steel then? I mean, how long was it before you ran your first marathon and then started taking on some of these extreme challenges that you've been involved in?
It was progressive. For me, it was never an overnight, like, oh, I never did anything and suddenly I'm just going to sign up for a marathon or an Ironman or something. I was 140 pounds coming into college, so I was very small. I was still suicidal actually in college. So it was there were just so many moving parts. I failed out of school by the time I was 14. So I learned disabilities. I wasn't a good student. I wasn't social. There were so many parts that I had to move and kind of stay afloat of that. There was no overnight. There was just, how do I survive this every day? In depression, there's a really deep sense of drowning all the time. And so just to stay afloat seems like an achievement on any given day. And I always say, like, there's you're staying afloat and then you're swimming and then you're on shore. And then the ability to just get on shore, if you come from a very depressive state chronically, seems like the achievement of a lifetime. So there's so many battles in essence to overcome and to work through and to learn of yourself and to deal with. Sports was fundamentally, you know, pivoting in every day that I engaged in it to me, and building the resilience and the ability to have some courage and to show up to do something that to transform my body. Actually, to start out with the transformation of the body, which happened in college, was my first endeavor into becoming Superman and into that persona, into that perception of myself. Was going from 140 pounds to 170 something pounds, 5% of body fat, and I looked like a monster. I looked like the Hulk. And in that, to me, was the first understanding of transformation and of possibility. So combining all these things over time, so it wasn't until my 30s that I started looking at, races, really entering races, really kind of signing up for a New York Marathon or a San Francisco Marathon or a half marathon, where I would put myself in environments outside of the gym or outside of just training for myself as a form of discipline and becoming. And then things kind of escalated really fast. I mean, I've done, I don't know, 30, 40 plus marathons to date, over 200 or 300 half marathons in actual races. I've done the calendar club where you run the same amount of miles a day, miles a month, which means at the end of the month, you're running 26 miles, 27 miles, 28 miles, 29 miles. And you run 460 miles in a given month. I've done ultras. I've done quite a few, and, I became a mountaineer. So as time's gone on, I looked for different types of challenges. So for a long period, running and training, just lifting was a big part of just the everyday routine on top of building companies. I have been a venture-backed entrepreneur for 25 years. I've been a part of building 8 different venture-backed companies, and 5 of them sold and 2 of them were unicorns. So it wasn't just about endeavoring and doing impossible physical challenges. It was about doing impossible things relative to where I was coming from.
Did the running help with that workload? Because obviously a lot of people find a real benefit, don't they, in running whilst you're stressed at work?
The lifting and the running both have significant and scientifically proven, neuroplasticity, as well as euphoric, as well as depression, as well as anxiety benefits. And actually, it's scientifically proven that running itself has a greater potency effect to depression than a lot of the pharmaceuticals themselves. So absolutely. I mean, when you're working that hard, the running and the working out is religion to me. I mean, I do that 6-7 days a week for the past 30 years. I mean, I don't skip. And luckily I've taken good care of my health. So I've had very few injuries that limited me in training or running. And you accustomed to running and training through, pain. There's being hurt, and then there's injuries. You ultimately sometimes have injuries that, have to have you be smart about managing your body and recovery. But I have gone decades without missing a day of training. And it is essential to, the stability that I have on an emotional standpoint, as well as on a physical standpoint, and on my stamina, and on, the dopamine and all the other chemicals that come into play, to being a very energized and energetic and high testosterone human being. You need a lot of energy to do these things. And that is a multiplier effect to your everyday life and who you can see yourself becoming. Running itself, which is hard to do. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. And people are like, oh, you must love running, or it's easy. It's never easy. I'm 50 years old, just did 20 miles yesterday in the heat in Miami. It's brutal. It's actually completely brutal. And people are like, wow, why do you do it? It's like, well, because the things I want to achieve and the opportunities are out there, and having a life that worth remembering and that I see myself in and being, that's that's part of the process and what it requires. In those little moments, of discipline, of seeing yourself through the process of running, whether it's 3 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles, whatever that challenge is, and however you choose to apply yourself to that is an enormous amount of benefit.
Of all the races that you've done, the halves and the marathons, what were your favorite 3 events?
I do love the rim to rim to rim, the Grand Canyon. I did that solo in under 12 hours or about 12 hours, 49 miles. It's about, I guess, about 90K. 21,000 feet vertical change. I like to be in grand environments. I did Denali twice on a 9-day and a 4-day schedule, which are usually 21 days with very low success rate, carrying 100-pound load. Really fantastic. The New York Marathon, it never fails. It's a very unique race with a level of intensity and energy. And as many say, it's the best day of the year in New York. What I like is, the human experience of what's happening around you, the presence to that. And so intensity does have a really big influence on the conduit of focus, like how much energy you apply to something in a very narrow span of time. And so in very hard things is this amazing opportunity, which is to be hyper focused and to really push yourself in a way where your brain and your body and your focus is you're present in time in a way that you cannot be almost in any other moment of your life. And so the presence is freedom. And so if you come from very difficult situations and environments, or if you have depressions, or if you have chronic anxiety, like when you enter these environments, they're peaceful places. You get into flow states. Like breathing is an enormous part of the oxygenation of the brain and the body, allows you to enter these flow states where you're present to where your feet are, right? And so there's all these kinds of opportunities that really come from the experience. So you can travel somewhere and then you can see a different culture and there's all these other people around, but you're going to have your own experience on top of that. I've got 4 or 5 of the hardest end races in the world coming in the next 12 months into the GTMB, Chamonix World Championship. And I had never run a true ultra 100K plus before this last August. And I also have the Marathon des Sables, which is 270 this year, 100 kilometers in Sahara. I didn't say I want to do all these. I started with one 130K race at elevation, and I was like, wow, I love this. Like I didn't know I would love this. I was in between challenges, and I was very active in different things. I was, fundraising and being a part of the Cal Peace Foundation for disabled athletes and doing half marathons, triathlons with disabled athletes.
Let's just pick up on the fundraising a little bit more then, because this has obviously been incredibly important to you. It gives you another dimension, doesn't it, when you're training and participating in these events, that you're doing it for somebody else as well. So when did you start getting into the fundraising? And just give us some background as to, who you've raised money for and how much and what your plans are for the future.
So my mother is very much of a very loving, compassionate, caring person who has very little means. And so I helped raise my brother. I've been taking care of my mom for 30 years. I think giving back and giving into environments of values and meaning has always been a part of my life. I had my first foundation in my early 20s with Doctors Without Frontiers in Africa and donating to those doctors. There was always an intent to not just surviving or becoming successful, but having a positive impact and giving back to others of less means or more vulnerable, just because that's the environment I grew up with, less means and being vulnerable. I wanted, and I had a need to care for that. There's, a time in life where you feel like you're not ready, a time where you feel where you're ready, a time where you have the means. I think I had achieved so much that, and circumstantially, I think it was about 5 years ago. I was trying to get into, I think it was a New York Marathon. A friend was like, "Oh, you can do it for a foundation, raise money." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize that." Well, that seems like a no-brainer. You have to make a choice, and you have to make sure that there is no option to not have that choice. I think it's one of the things that people struggle with, which is optionality is a deterrent to actually achieving things. Zero Cancer was my first fundraising for prostate cancer. And you're a participant in something bigger than yourself on top of, the race. And there's this duality suddenly that opens itself up to how you think of the value and the meaning of what you're doing. Having become successful, I have access to people who have money. The minimum requirements of, bibs to join, and there are hundreds of foundations who get bibs through tons of different races around the world, is a very accessible and easy way of not just doing something that you're going to be proud of for yourself, but actually joining a community that has impact on others. I don't want to say it's free, but it's very accessible. I mean, there are plenty of races where it's $300 or $500 or $800, and as thousands of people do that, it has a material impact, right? And the causes can be easily cherry picked to whatever it is an affinity to you, or something that happened in your family or in your past, or somebody you know about. And so there's a lot of ways to actually find, relevance to that community and to supporting others. And so as you race in a New York Marathon or a London Marathon or whatever that may be, and you're wearing colors essentially of representation of other people's, challenges and hardship and purpose and meaning, everything's just a little bit bigger suddenly, bigger in yourself, bigger in your time. And it's also quite helpful, honestly, in dealing with the many cycles that experience of the marathon, experience, which is cyclical. And you go from, oh, I love this is the worst thing ever, I should quit right now. And this, by the way, continues for everybody at all levels. It never, there's this ruminating of, why am I doing this? It doesn't matter who you are. It is a part of everybody's human reality, which is, if you're going to suffer and your brain feels suffering and wants to avoid that, you're going to question yourself by this position of like, well, there's an option. There's an option to quit. When you have greater meaning than yourself, or greater purpose than yourself, on top of you wanting to challenge yourself, it actually fits together quite nicely. And it's a lot less complicated than people may think of it to be. It also gives you an ability to actually not depend on the lottery. If you're going to say, hey, I want to do the New York Marathon in 4 months, but I don't want to do the lottery, forget the lottery. You choose a cause, raise a little bit of money. You just need a pair of sneakers and show up every day for yourself to run, and forget the time.
With that first race, did you literally just set a fundraising page up and send it around a few mates, and the money was raised quite quickly?
Today, with social media, Instagram and TikTok and whatever else that may be, and Facebook, and there's all these deep links and tools, and then all the fundraising, companies have those as well, as in fundraising pages, and you can create your own custom page as an ambassador or just as fundraising. You can share those links via email, social media. You can tag anything that you do. So if you're training every day, you can just keep on tagging your fundraising page. It is hard to consistently do it. It is hard to consistently see that some people will not donate. It is hard to be disappointed by people's lack of care of your effort or other people's circumstances. I think that's hard. But the ability to do it, the ability to enter a race, to get a bib, to choose a foundation, to promote and market that, is actually quite easy and very accessible.
It's a lot easier than people think. And we have this conversation all the time. There's a perception that it's incredibly difficult. It's obviously more difficult for people who don't have a big network, or they're not in certain circles, but then they can take a different approach and they can organize their own fundraising event, a dinner party at home, or whatever it might be, a quiz or a raffle. It doesn't have to be difficult. Just tell us a little bit about the charities that you are an ambassador and a trustee for, because I know that you've raised a significant amount for those guys, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've raised six figures for our kids' foundations, kids at risk in education. I've raised a fair amount of money for the Cal Peace Foundation as well, 25,000 this year alone as an ambassador. The quarter of that probably I've donated myself. I've donated and raised about somewhere around $1 million actually over the past 10 years. Yeah, I'm a big donor.
How have you done that? Has that been a mix of money from yourself, but also fundraising events, or yeah, going out to friends on social media? Has it been just a complete mix?
It's a mix to two things. One is my contribution is always somewhere around a third to a half of all I raise and donate. And that matters to what you're asking of. You shouldn't just ask people to donate because you're choosing to do something hard. That's a bit on you, and you have to show that you're a contributor. And so if your contribution can only be $100 out of 1,000, that matters. I always put money first. I always invest in me, and I put the money first, and I say, hey, I want to raise $1,000. I'm putting into 100. What can you do? I say, hey, if you have 20, 50, 100, obviously you put in front of people things that are relatable to them. Because of how many somewhat impossible things I do, from all the speed mountaineering and the ultras and the backcountry skiing or whatever off-road kind of races that I do, people trust in you. People love to see and get excited about what you're doing. And in some ways, people are donating as much about because I'm asking and because of what I choose to do when I ask. And they're like, Wilson's crazy. Like, it's Wilson. I'm donating. And it becomes a little bit like I hate to say it, it's like venture capitalists. If you've done a lot and you failed and succeeded and you've done it more than most people, they'll be like, it's Wilson, I'm going to write a check. Because there's a predisposition that you're going to do whatever that takes. You're going to finish that. You're going to do the work. You're going to push it to the level where it will matter. It will work out. You will have the impact. So a bit of my ability to raise is not just that I have friends with means. It's just that they're like, oh, it's Wilson. And I earned that. I earned that trust and I earned that respect of being able to be like, hey, I'm going to do this ultra. It's 130K. It's at 3,000 meter elevation minimum. I'm going to try to do it in this time. And I'm raising money for disabled athletes through the Cal Peace Foundation. I'm going to wear their colors, and the money's going to go to disabled athletes. And that wasn't a race necessarily where I was pushing an athlete, even though with the Cal Peace Foundations, I've done triathlons and marathons. Have marathons with disabled athletes. That touches people. That people see that and they're like, wow, like you're pushing another human. Like people struggle to just go run a 10K. So people see that. And
how often do you ask the same people to support you?
Being the same people who donate the same, what I've found is that couple of things that I've learned. One is you have to be very aggressive, even though it feels very uncomfortable. And asking people for money is uncomfortable. It doesn't matter who you are, and some people just don't care. But I care about the people, and asking feels somewhat uncomfortable. And so I use multiple channels where I will DM people directly. So I have 50 people on my direct messages, that I've known for a long time, who I'm going to push the page to. Then I've got my social media, and I'm going to push the page, I'm going to deep link the page into that, or the foundation, or tag the foundation, and then into my training. And so as I train, make little videos, take pictures, just 20 miles today, whatever, I'm raising for the Cal Peace. I create awareness, and I don't push it to people, but I create awareness about it. Then I write emails, and I will send emails directly to people that I may not know as well, or I want to tell a bit more about, or I want to explain more about why I'm raising, and they require, and I want to include some pictures, right? Visuals are very important. Numbers are very important. How big is the race, and what time are you trying to accomplish? And you have to create context and meaning for other people so that they feel triggered, whether it's guilt, whether it's excitement, whether it's how impressed they are by what you're trying to achieve. The reality is you have to trigger some component of what excites them and understand your audience, right? Which is, what is it that, makes them want to do something for you? Is it guilt? And that's okay. That's okay. People should feel guilty. I mean, they're wasting a lot of their money in $10 Starbucks cups. They can afford, $100 donation. It's the question of whether or not you've given them the reason to think that they have to or they want to. And so it's important to recognize a little bit of the salesmanship. And so pictures matters, sharing the training matters, following through matters, giving the details matters, making it exciting matters. And so all these parts will come into play. Now, what I found is that people who either have direct, relatability to the cause will always donate. People who have relatability to how crazy of the challenge you're doing will always donate. People who know you historically to doing very hard things will donate. And people will either donate right away or don't donate. And that's something that's, hard to also understand in behavior, which is when you send out a blast and you decide to target people based on channels of communication and the content, people will either be immediately responsive. And it's very important to tell them it takes 30 seconds. It'll take 2 minutes. There's a link. You can donate whatever you're comfortable donating. It goes to this. Really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. It's very, small amount of your time. So figuring out what channel to use and when to send it to people and how to trigger them. But ultimately, you have to ask, and you have to be intentional about that. And you have to say it matters to you. And they will either do it very right away within a small 24, 48-hour window, or they just won't. And it's hard to accept that about people. They're not going to suddenly 1 month later go back to a past DM or a past Insta post or a past Facebook page post or a past email and be like, oh yeah, I was going to care about that. Now, you either have to choose to accept that they don't care for one reason or another, or that they did and they donated. And obviously, what people choose to donate is what they choose to donate. I don't ever circle back around asking for more. Somebody who knows nothing about you, nothing about the cause, or has no relatability to it, it's hard for them to give a lot of money to something. And so you kind of have to craft a little bit of your understanding of who these people are. And then you have to figure out how much you want to expose yourself. There's LinkedIn. Do you want to post on LinkedIn to your work community? And again, you have to accept that maybe people won't care. You have to accept that fewer people than you think will donate. And that's okay. It's okay, because what matters is those who do. What matters is that you've created exposure for the foundation, even if you don't get money. So there's multiple effects and value in fundraising while also doing hard things. Raise money for those causes that will impact other people beyond this moment in time. And then there's the branding and the marketing and the exposure of the cause and of the people in it and of the humans and the humanity of that. For me, it's a big part.
You say to someone who has got an entry in a half marathon who isn't thinking about running for charity, what would you say to that person?
Sure, maybe it's your first race and it sounds like it's a lot in itself, but you're probably spending 2 hours a day on social media anyway. You're probably consuming, 10 hours, 20 hours a week of social media and content and posts and stuff that doesn't matter anyway, or it may or may not. But you're already doing other things that are similar, or that you could be doing, your time to do that as well. So look around you, think of your life, think of people you've met, think of family members who have had cancer or some disease or some disability or dementia, whatever it may be. Find a bit of your humanity in that beyond just the opportunity that you've given yourself to challenge yourself to doing something hard and seeing yourself through that, and realize that for the same price, you can also have a multiplier effect and feel more rewarded on top of that for choosing to impact somebody else's life. And maybe it's your first time and you won't raise more than a couple $100, and that's okay, because that you made that a part of the meaning and the purpose based on your attitude and your effort and your choices, whose life you're going to change. Yet you're the limitation to what's possible. In the world of 8 billion people, we already have so much. And I think one of the important parts of all that is to realize the gratitude and the gratefulness that you should have for being able to run, being able to choose that kind of pain, being able to finish the race, being able to put those sneakers on, being able to have the time, right? Like, there's a lot to be grateful for when you choose running and the experience of it, and seeing yourself through that, but also in the fact that you get to make that choice, right? And so then it's like, well, you also get to have an impact on other people's life.
And that was absolutely fascinating. We could probably talk for another 3 or 4 hours, but I know you've got another run to do now, so I'm sure you're looking forward to that. But really appreciate your time, very inspiring, and hopefully we can have another conversation next year and find out how these extreme ultra challenges are going.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your time, Tim.
Thanks for listening to this Sapphire Running Zone podcast. Keep checking back as we have lots more podcasts coming soon.